you tonight. So we're going to go ahead and kick things off as we continue to welcome additional friends. Thank you for being here tonight. Welcome to our 2024 January event, officially hosting with the Reading League North Carolina and 95% group. We are so grateful to be able to share tonight's content with you. Grounding multilingual learners, reading instruction in evidence. We are thrilled that you're here. We invite you to drop in the chat where you're joining us from and what you're maybe looking forward to learning tonight. And just a quick note that we are recording the session and plan to be able to share it with you once we're finished. I'm Linda Ryan. I'm the president of the Reading League North Carolina, and we are very grateful that you can be here tonight. Our mission as an organization is to advance the awareness, understanding, and use of evidence-aligned reading instruction across North Carolina. And this is aligned to our national organization's mission as well. And our goal is really to do this by creating a community of statewide stakeholders that are invested in ensuring all children receive equitable literacy instruction. Some of the things that we do in order to reach this mission is by providing outreach and seeking mission moments where we can be sharing with other community members, having educational events such as tonight, and as well working on developing strong partnerships with colleagues through collaboration. So we invite you to stay connected with us. We anticipate lots more coming from our organization. I'm going to get ready to hand it off to one of my colleagues who will introduce our first speaker tonight.
Welcome, everyone, and it is such a pleasure for us to have both Dr. Fierro and Dr. Coady here with us tonight to share their expertise. We will start with Dr. Fierro. So to give you some background about him, Dr. Antonio Fierro is a former Texas State Teacher of the Year and was a member of the Letters cohort of literacy experts led by Dr. Louisa Moats for almost 20 years. He has contributed to several literacy curricula for English learners, and along with his colleague, Dr. Mary Dahlgren, authored Kid Lips, a curriculum that teaches the articulatory features of English phonemes to young children with additional support for English learners. His areas of interest include early literacy instruction, improving the learning experience of pre-service teacher candidates, and the research and practice that impacts English learners. As a recognized literacy leader, he currently sits on the national board of the Reading League. And I'll just throw in one other thing there. He is presenting at Plain Talk next week. So I will be one of the people in his audience. And if you are going, I highly encourage you to attend as well, because you will take away good information. So with that, we hand it off to you, Dr. Fierro, and thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you very much. But no pressure, right? No pressure whatsoever.
No pressure at all.
None whatsoever. Thank you so much to my colleagues for the invitation. Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Let's go ahead and get started because we do have quite a bit of information to go through today, right? So I think you can you see my screen okay? All right, right on. Super. Let me just go ahead and adjust on my side. There it is. All right, now I can see everything. And to all of you who are joining us from all over the place, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it. My name is Antonio Fierro. I am the Vice President of Professional Learning and Academics at the 95% Group. Colleagues, if you have any questions whatsoever, please reach out at afierro@95percentgroup.com. There's just lots of information to share, and I am very pleased that I'm sharing the platform this afternoon with Dr. Coady. So let's go ahead and get started. So I make sure that we have plenty of time as we proceed. So colleagues, one thing that just want to keep in mind that our English learners are doing double the cognitive work, and it is also our responsibility to then limit that or diminish that load as much as possible. At the 95% Group, we are committed to not only building the science or to build on the science to empower teachers, but also extend that learning so that we can provide the best instructional experiences for our English learners as well. So we're very committed to that. And you'll see as I continue, or we'll talk briefly about extensions of our sound walls into Spanish as well. So what's on the agenda this afternoon or this evening? I'm going to talk a little bit about ELs versus multilingual learners, as in what's in a name, and throw in a little bit about translanguaging, its influence on cross-linguistic connections. Colleagues, I spent most of my probably over half of my career researching those cross-linguistic connections, and we'll briefly touch on those this afternoon or this evening. But I will definitely go into far more detail, also into our Spanish sound walls when we meet in New Orleans next week. I want to also introduce you to the Reading League joint statement that makes me very happy that I think that for the first time, colleagues, in my career, that all camps are have the same vision, and there aren't any misconceptions, very few misunderstandings, but we're all moving forward, and it just really pleases me to know and to report that. So let's talk about what's in the name, colleagues. Just to make sure, and I always begin my teaching by ensuring that I don't insult anyone. I will be addressing the English learner as an English learner, all right, based on the Every Student Succeeds Act of 2015. So that identifies an English learner as any student whose primary language is not English, whose English skills are not sufficient to be successful in the classroom, and who has not yet tested proficient in English. That being said, the field is also gradually turning to a more global label, the multilingual learner. I stick to the English learner because in linguistics, really, there is a difference between a multilingual learner versus an English learner. So that English learner is that student who is trying to, or is learning how to read and write in English, how to speak in English. A multilingual learner, just to be a little bit more precise, as far as the linguistics field is concerned, may include a student who's already proficient in English, but learning to read another language, learning to read or write in another language, such as Spanish or any Native American language. All right. So the needs of a multilingual learner who is already proficient in English is going to be very different from the needs of an English learner, for example, who just arrived here from Honduras or Southeast Asia, whatever the case might be. And we'll talk a little bit about variability as well. Okay. The bottom line, though, colleagues, the bottom line is that what's really important here as we're working with English learners, multilingual learners, is that we must identify and support the cultural, social, emotional, experiential, and as a linguist, the linguistic assets that students bring to the table. So I do not want to diminish all the other areas by any stretch of the imagination. I will be talking primarily about the linguistic capability as children are learning to read and write in English and how we must honor that. And that leads me, colleagues, into this area called translanguaging. I kind of want to talk about that here in a little bit. I know Dr. Coady, I think last time we talked, she was going to talk a little bit more about the numbers of English learners in North Carolina, your area. I just want to give a national picture, right? Fall of 2019, the National Center for Education Statistics identified a little over 5 million ELs that accounted for 10.4% of the total student population. Fall of 2020, that number fell to 5 million or 10.3% of the total student population. Keep in mind, colleagues, that 2020 was the pandemic. So as we are anticipating the report that comes out this spring, my prediction is that that number or that percentage is going to climb to 11% or very close to it. So let's see what happens. Okay, let's see what happens. Again, as far as the national picture, here you have this legend. We'll see what this is all about here. Oh, I don't want to go there yet. All right. And you can see those states that are in that darker green hue. And I hope it's green, colleagues, or I am colorblind. And so my colors are a little bit different from everybody else's, but I think they're green. But in that darker green hue, those states represent 10% or higher, and have actually 10% or higher of ELs. So Texas, where I am from, where I am living in El Paso, actually El Paso, Texas, El Paso, Texas, we have 20% of our student population that is identified as English learners. In North Carolina, 7.7%. I really do anticipate that that number is going to climb, and that's not going to be too far away from the national average. And those numbers along the East Coast seem to be growing quite exponentially. So we'll see what the 2021 numbers that are being gathered right now, see what they look like, right? So that's just a national picture. Let's move along. What about translanguaging? What's its influence on cross-linguistic connections, colleagues? And also realize the variability factor, the phonetics, and the cross-linguistic connections again, all right? So this term is being used quite a bit out in the field, all right? It's not a new term, although a lot of folks think it is. It's not. It could go straight back to Wales about 40 years ago, when there was work being done on the acquisition of another language. And at the time, the understanding, the misconception was that you held two linguistic systems separately, and they were processed separately. After much research, we found that that was not true, right? So there is a lot of that cross-linguistic connection that occurs, whereas the linguistic repertoire from one language is going to be used to help and assist to support the acquisition of the second language. Here in the US in 2014, Ofelia Garcia introduced the concept of translanguaging in a book titled Bilingual Education in the 21st Century, Global Perspective in Translanguaging, Language by Bilingualism and Education. And try saying that 10 times real fast, okay? And under just one push of breath. So colleagues, my quest for the last several years, about 5 years or so, has been to really start narrowing down this definition of translanguaging, all right? So it's the ability to move fluidly between languages, all right? And it can also be considered now an approach, pedagogical approach to teaching, in which teachers support this ability of moving back and forth between those linguistic repertoires of each language, right? Which makes sense. Now, out in the field, I also hear code switching being used interchangeably with translanguaging. My understanding and my interpretation of translanguaging is that translanguaging is this umbrella term, and code switching falls under this umbrella term of translanguaging. And that is like seeking or stating, I'm looking for a certain word in English. I don't possess it yet, so I'm going to stick in some Spanish in there, right? So that's really the code switching. And what we do here quite a bit in my neck of the woods is that I can speak English and Spanish, and I can start off with English, and then the next sentence may be Spanish, and then on the next one I'm going to be English, and we go back and forth, right? So in translanguaging, English learners are able to and encouraged to think in multiple languages simultaneously. And that goes back to the English learners are doing double the cognitive work and use their home language as a means to learn academic language. I was very fortunate to have done some work with Julie Washington, actually about a year ago this time, January of 2023, when we were back in New Orleans and we were doing some work on translanguaging, right? So the best definition that I have for translanguaging is that last bulleted item. It's all about encouraging, and this is from the mouth of my dear friend, Julie Washington. It's all about enduring or encouraging students to access their full linguistic repertoire, to include dialectal differences or variations as well, okay? So right off the bat, what are some must-haves in a classroom that has English learners? First of all, we must provide a safe environment. This isn't anything new. We want students to generalize, overgeneralize as they are developing the language. And it's through overgeneralizing or through hypothesizing that we are learning and anticipating the acquisition of that second language. So this is a safe environment would be one where students are communicating, engaged, and taking risks. Now, as a member of staff of 95% group, I keep on stating the importance of allowing children student conversation, all right? Not just teacher talk. Teacher talk is very important, but encouraging that oral language. Colleagues, I can't go anywhere unless I have oral language, and then I can go ahead and move into phonological sensitivity in a way, and then all the way to phonemic awareness. So when I'm talking about oral language, I'm talking about teaching form. I'm talking about teaching content, vocabulary, morphosyntax, variations that exist too. So what are the morphemes in that word? What does that word mean? And then obviously, really the most important, in my opinion, is the sense of pragmatics. All right, how do we use that language? So when we're using that language, it allows us to then go ahead and give feedback as well. We have to provide that positive school and classroom climate where teachers and all school personnel are language models. So we are going to be speaking in complete sentences. We are going to be enunciating. We're going to be listening attentively, very, very closely as we provide feedback. We must maintain that homeschool connection. All right, it has to be sought. It has to be maintained. We're doing some work. Some colleagues and I are doing some work in Maryland and really looking at the implementation of the reading science, and that is very important. What are those connections all about, right? So we must maintain that explicit and intentional instruction with multiple opportunities for practice, and especially being mindful of that variation or that variability, right? A child who just arrived compared to maybe a second, third generation English learner. My colleagues over at AIM have a wonderful professional development as well, where they talk about mean length of utterance. All right, so how long are these sentences? And that's what we need to, they are articulating. So if any of my colleagues from AIM are listening, just a shout out, because they're doing some great work there in trying to identify the number or the length of those sentences, and how does that contribute to overall instruction. Let me go ahead and move on. So students' linguistic assets are accepted, as I mentioned, honored, and used as scaffolds to gradually acquire an additional language, which allows us then, as we support the linguistic assets, we allow students to communicate, to be engaged, and to be taking risks. So that's that reciprocal effect. So when we're being mindful of that linguistic repertoire, colleagues, we are being mindful of what is going on, especially as we're talking about cognitive science, right? Now take a look at that frontal lobe, all right, that motor cortex, where we are going to have that long-term storage of sounds. In English, I have 44 phonemes. In Spanish, I only have 22. Wow, all right? So this is where we're going to be processing that language, the phonetics of that of each language, and then in the back here by the occipital lobe and the temporal lobe. I'm pointing to my screen as if you know what I'm looking at. Yeah, sorry. The visual word form area is where we have that level of automaticity. Now, in that occipital lobe, we're also going to be processing graphemes. Now, remember, colleagues, that Spanish is very, very transparent, right? So it's phoneme, letter. But be mindful that English is, pretty consistent from the standpoint of phoneme grapheme. Not phoneme letter, but phoneme grapheme, right? So it's still pretty consistent. The issue is that we have to be very explicit and intentional in teaching, especially those students who are processing at a letter level. All right, to start understanding that TCH is one chunk, whereas in some languages, T is one, C is another one, H is another one, but in English, that is an entire grapheme. So we have to be mindful of this reading, what I call my reading superhighway, all right, my reading superhighway. And colleagues, for the longest time, it was said that our English learners have another superhighway. No, it's the same superhighway, all right? It's the same one. But I will argue that superhighway has more lanes, all right? It has to have more lanes because of the processing of language, especially if we're supporting the linguistic assets that children already bring with them, right? So we're going to be storing phonemes, we're going to be storing graphemes. And as we're doing that, though, colleagues, that's so the science of reading or the psychology of reading, which is what I've been studying for 40 years, is not just about that superhighway. Yes, that superhighway is super important. Absolutely. All right. But with our English and with our English learners, and really across the board, we must be mindful of the vocabulary, the meaning that we're making. All right. The experiences, that experiential background that we have to establish. So not only are we moving from front to back, right, but we're also moving vertically as we're developing vocabulary, as we are developing those experiences. And colleagues, all right, so those foundational skills are so important. But what gets us every time is the lack of vocabulary. Right? It's the lack of vocabulary, and we must be continue building that, but providing it from a sense of, this is the phonology of that word. This is the orthography of this word. This is what this word means. And now these are all my experiences. And how do I use that word in a sentence? So back to translanguaging. All right. Translanguaging has had a very romantic stand here in across the field. You know, okay, we take these skills that children bring to the table and we just go ahead and honor them, and they transfer over. There's a love-hate relationship, if you ask me, about when we're dealing with translanguaging. And let me tell you why, all right? I may not have any of the linguistic repertoire that even remotely resembles what I'm learning, all right? On my way back from Atlanta this weekend, I was sitting next to a student who is studying applied linguistics, and she speaks Mandarin Chinese. And she was doing some presentations on her laptop. Of course, I was sitting next to her. I was being nosy. I said, "Hey, what are you doing?" And so she was telling me, and I'm like, my goodness, I mean, that is a logographic orthographic system. All right. How do I get that? How do I understand that? Where am I processing that? So as now a native speaker of English, well, Spanish and then English, I have no idea what those symbols are all about, right? So yes, I have a linguistic repertoire, but if I'm learning Mandarin Chinese, yikes, I don't have that. So it has to be very intentional. So again, and there's a perfect experience, a logographic orthographic system versus an alphabetic orthographic system. Okay, very limited assets, all right? However, speech will be there. All right, how about this second one? I have something similar in my linguistic repertoire. A connection is made and the skill transfers. Pathways are reinforced, but new pathways may be needed. I need language support. So when we're talking about phonology to phonetics to phonemic awareness, holy smokes, all right? So let me mention just super quick that when we're talking about translanguaging, phonological sensitivity, and phonemic awareness, being mindful that any alphabetic language needs phonemic awareness. I need to get to this level of phonemic awareness. Now, I am taking part of my dissertation study that still looks pretty similar to what's out there today, all right? But when I published my dissertation, I looked at phonological awareness, all these steps as phonological awareness. Well, Susan Brady in 2010 really looked at things a little bit differently and identified those steps before phonemic awareness as phonological sensitivity. All right. I still need to get to phonemic awareness. And I have been worked with children intervention who are English learners, and we get them to a level of phonemic awareness. And we still need that level of phonemic awareness. And once we get to that level of phonemic awareness, we connect the grapheme. I will argue that for some students, those levels of phonological sensitivity still need to be used as scaffolds. I have some colleagues who will say, no, that may not be. I will argue that with the newcomer, I may need to provide a little bit more time on just word awareness, or else it's just one long continued oral discourse, and I do not know where the word boundaries are located. So even with manipulatives, I can start working on that word boundary. However, here's my however for my colleagues who will kind of argue with me on this one, is that I do not need to master these levels of phonological sensitivity to get to phonemic awareness. All right. I will provide that with a scaffold and maybe even, start moving into phonemic awareness slowly but surely. So be aware that still phonemic awareness is still the goal regardless. All right. And folks will argue that Spanish is a syllabic language. All right. Spanish is not a syllabic language. A syllabic language is where a symbol represents an entire syllable. What is being said, what really folks are trying to say, is that we chunk in Spanish by syllables, all right? And that's all there's to it. I mean, it's syllables, but the vowels are are consistent. That's all there's to it. All right, so let me move on here. This is where I'm saying, well, what about this cross-linguistic connection? Where's this interference? Notice, colleagues, with just my set of fricatives, all right, the first two columns take my fricatives, and in English I have let's do the voiced. The as in veil, I have it in the initial position, I have it in the final position, but the as we know it does not exist in Spanish. All right, the does not really, well, it exists, but it's being represented by another letter. But check this out. Don't exist in Spanish. However, I have these little numbers there too as well that identifies, well, perhaps some dialects in Europe, European dialects might have them, all right? Okay. But you can see now comes all this cross-linguistic connection, all this like, oh my gosh, wait a minute, I don't have it, I do have it, now I do have it here, but it's represented by a different letter. I have that interdental voice, th, right? As in this, that, there. But in Spanish, for example, it's represented by the letter D, not by a digraph th. So when children spell that, D-A-T, or this, D-I-S, is it any wonder why they're doing that? Right? So hopefully this will give us some clearance, some ideas of what's going on. And not to mention that now I have a shh. There I have in Spanish, unless I shh, cállate, which means shh, be quiet. All right. But that's about it. Right. Now, check this out, colleagues. Check this out. This is going to be interesting. If I can get there you go. Here are my Spanish vowels. I, E, A, O, U. I, E, A, O, U. Holy cow. I, E, A, I, O, U, U. Oi, ow, or, schwa, right? Now, I practice really hard on those, so I would expect some applause. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, Kim. Thank you. I need the applause. Thank you. If you were here, I'd be passing around my hat and collecting at least some dollar bills. There, all right. So, and notice how closely these vowels are to each other. And this is really a culmination of 10 years worth of study. And it's a busy chart, but just to let you know, the only vowel sound and the vowel letter that transfer over from Spanish to English is that short E sound. If it's in yellow, there's going to be some confusion, usually in the grapheme representation. The pink one, the O, the letter O exists in both languages, but in Spanish it's O, in English it's O. And look at all the red, the red squares. Those phonemes simply do not exist in Spanish, all right? So when I'm asked why our English learners, especially those from who are Spanish speaking, and that's about 75% of our English learners, why do they struggle so much with the vowels? Look how close the vowels are, first of all. And look how close the vowels are in Spanish, all right? There's a big variation there, right? Big. All right. So what I'm saying is, take a look at that linguistic repertoire, give kids time. There's lots of practice that may be needed. And then finally, the last one is I have something similar in my linguistic repertoire. A connection is made, but it's not exactly what I'm learning. All right. There's some cognitive dissonance. So new brain pathways are made. For example, if I have the word exit in English, there's something very similar in Spanish, éxito, which means success. So there's some sentence differences as well. In English, I'm going to have an adjective noun like practice section, but in Spanish, it's a little bit more complicated. I have to have a preposition in there as well. All right. So that's just at the syntax level. That's just at the sentence level. All right. So let me go ahead and give you an opportunity to download the Reading League joint statement. All right. And this is what I was talking about. We had a summit back in spring of last year in Las Vegas. We invited all the camps and finally came to an agreement. All right. So if you did not get that, you could just Google the joint statement, Reading League, and you can go ahead and download that. And basically, I'll tell you, just read through it. It's only 7 pages. Really, it's about an understanding now that we must inform our instruction. It has to be complemented by understanding and addressing the social, linguistic, and cultural factors that impact students. There's that translanguaging again, not to mention the social and cultural factors. Here in a nutshell, you know what? The science of reading, the psychology of reading is not just about native English speakers. It's not English-centric. It applies to all. Do we need more information? Yes, absolutely. But haven't we been gathering that information for our native English speakers as well? Yeah, right. But be mindful that what is required for our native English speakers is also required for our English learners or multilingual learners with adjustments. That's what was published by in the National Report of English learners and language minority children. And those adjustments really are scaffolds. I am so excited that these camps came together and said, oh yeah, this is what we need, right? In camps that didn't really agree all the time, all right? So as I finish and do a quick recap, colleagues, we must encourage students to access their full linguistic repertoire. We must give them an opportunity to practice, to try, to overgeneralize and hypothesize as well, and realize that the transfer of skills from one language to another can be seamless, but it can also cause some cognitive dissonance. And what I'm so excited about is the fact that a common ground now does exist between all camps. First time ever. Colleagues, if you need any additional information, this was rather quick, but I didn't want to take up, Dr. Coady, I took up 3 minutes of your time, but if you have any other questions, I will be here. Please reach out at afierro@95percentgroup.com.
Thank you so much, Antonio. My name's Laura Freeman. I'm the Vice President of the Reading League North Carolina Board, and it is my honor to introduce Dr. Coady. We're going to be talking about North Carolina. We have a lot of people on the call who are not from North Carolina. Stay here. We're going to give some things away at the end, but I think you'll also be able to learn some things from Dr. Coady's presentation that help you think about your own state. So Dr. Maria Coady is the Goodnight Distinguished Professor in Educational Equity and a Professor of Multilingual Education at North Carolina State University, my alma mater. Our Reading League Board learned of Dr. Coady from a couple of articles she wrote for Ed&C. After she starts, I'll drop those in the chat. Dr. Coady examines bilingual education and biliteracy development, rural education, and teacher and leader preparation. Her books include the Coral Way Bilingual Program, Connecting School and the Multilingual Home. And her edited books are Early Language Learning Policies in the 21st Century and Educating Multilingual Students in Rural Schools. Dr. Coady consults with the U.S. Department of Justice and Office of Civil Rights on language and educational rights for multilingual learners and their families. In 2020, the American Educational Research Association awarded Dr. Coady for exemplary contributions to practiced engaged research. She works with our North Carolina Department of Public Instruction and regularly provides educator support to rural school districts with multilingual students. And of course, she is preparing pre-service educators as a professor at NC State. Thank you, Dr. Coady, for volunteering your expertise and time with us to be with us tonight.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much for that kind welcome. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now. Thank you, Dr. Fierro, for your work. Let me go here to share screen slideshow. Okay, there we go. I think you can see my slide there. There's a red from North Carolina State. Welcome. Well, thank you everybody for being here. It's a pleasure, and I really appreciate the invitation to talk about multilingual learners in the state of North Carolina. I'm going to focus my work on that. I'd first like to say thank you to the Reading League North Carolina for inviting me to be here tonight and for all of your hard work to galvanize educators around the state in an important issue, and that is literacy development for all students. We are all behind you and your efforts, so thank you so much. And a special thank you to Ivana Manthor Anderson, who's our colleague in multilingual education at the DPI. So thanks, Ivana. I hope you're out there and appreciate your work. I'd like to just get started by talking a little bit about an overview about what I'm going to talk about today. It's slightly different than Dr. Fierro. I want to focus sort of a little more on the state of North Carolina and some of the literacy activities and practices here. And I'd love to leave you today with a couple of can-dos, takeaways, things that you can do in your classroom setting or in your school or district that might be helpful for you and your colleagues around literacy development for multilingual learners. So I'm going to start with who are multilingual learners in North Carolina, and a little bit of demographic data around that, how those numbers are shifting. I'll talk about what are we talking about when we think about evidence-based practices for reading development and literacy development for multilingual learners. I'll talk about the what, and then I'll give you a little bit of the how. As I said, how do we put this all together? What are some of the things I can do in school right away? So the who, what, and how. So without further ado, we'll get going here. So the who, some of these images are from programs that I've run in literacy development with multilingual learners. This happened to be from an early literacy program that I ran in rural Florida. And so these children are learning through the medium of two languages in many cases. And so these are our simultaneous bilingual children that bring to school with them an incredibly rich linguistic repertoire. So we want to remember that kids bring to school a lot of resources with them already, okay? So who are the multilingual learners in North Carolina? Well, about 1.4 million in North Carolina. These numbers you can find on our great DPI website. But I want to point out that second bullet. I just pulled those data down a few weeks ago that we have over 162,000 identified multilingual learners in the state. Last year, those numbers were 146,000. So for many of my colleagues I see in the chat here from some counties in the district, you're seeing likely numbers that are quite big in your district of multilingual learners. That's the language that the state DPI is using as the identifier for students in the process of receiving specialized language services in public schools. So we have over 162,000 now. And again, some of the districts are reporting out that their schools have key schools that have gone from 20% multilingual learner, and then this year, 50%. 15% this year, 43%. I'm hearing this across the state in certain districts. So again, our numbers seem to be going up. And again, those might be data that are catching up after COVID. As Dr. Fierro pointed out, we're still trying to get our number on our handle on the right numbers here. Spanish is the most widely used language, home language in North Carolina, like it is across the United States. But here's a piece of data I'd like for everybody to keep in mind, that more than 270,000 students come from homes where languages other than English is spoken. So just look at the numbers. 162,000 identified ML students, but more than 270,000 homes. So as you think about literacy practices and family practices and engagement, remember that even more kids come from homes where parents or caregivers, guardians don't speak English than the number of identified kids. And that's real important because our districts need to be communicating in those languages with families. And we know family engagement is an important part of overall literacy development for our kids and achievement. So just wanted to point that out and underscore the numbers in our state. real important for me. 80% of North Carolina's counties are considered rural. Those are the federal categories and the locale classifications. So we are a really rich state in terms of agriculture, the amount of produce we harvest, the amount of poultry processing that we do in North Carolina, everything from the eastern seaboard and the Outer Banks and fishing up into the mountains where we do Christmas tree and so on. And many of our ML families are involved in the agriculture and the processing of the foods that we provide and supply across the United States. So this is an important part of our population. A little side note I'd like to keep in mind as we think about shifting demographics from here into the future, remember that these are also the same families that are most vulnerable to things like climate change and things that are coming our way as educators that we're going to start needing to pay more attention to in the future. So we have this on our radar in teacher ed and teacher preparation where we're looking at these issues. As we looked at the state data, note that only 3.5% of our teachers or leaders together combined hold a credential in ESL. So this is important. We have a big number and more than 7%. Some of our districts are very high numbers of ML students, but very few of our students are actually certified in this area. So we really need to pay attention to preparing educators. Our rural educators are telling us especially that hiring more ESL teachers is a financial difficulty for them. They are asking for more preparation for all teachers to have support in core content to work with multilingual learners. So we're working on that and we're getting there. So please keep that in mind as you're thinking about the programs that you're providing for MLs and their families. And finally, as we know, North Carolina has the 5th largest number of dual language immersion programs in the United States and the largest in the Southeast. So we have a lot of bilingual resources. We want that number to grow and we want to do that with our kids. Okay. Where are our North Carolina's multilingual learners? Well, you can see in all of our districts, we have multilingual learners. And if you note, some of these districts down here have numbers. When I look at NC demographic data that you don't see here, that we can see that these numbers down in the southern part of our state and moving up into the outside of the urbanized areas, those numbers are going to grow tremendously between now and 2050. So the numbers aren't going to go down, they're going to go up. And so we want to be prepared to provide the right kinds of reading instruction, literacy support for multilingual learners across the state, whether they're in dual language immersion programs or if they're working with specialized language teachers in core curriculum. Okay. So just by way of kind of laying down where we're at in North Carolina, we are a state that uses the WIDA framework to provide support for multilingual learners in our state. So WIDA stands for Worldwide Instructional Design and Assessment. Has a bigger history than that had to do with Wisconsin and some other states, but it is Worldwide Instructional Design. And WIDA provides a framework for educators to be able to think about language and the way they differentiate their language for an instruction for students in the process of learning English. So there's some really good materials that WIDA has provided to our state. We can provide more information if you'd like on that, but it's important to know that WIDA, that our state is part of a 40-state consortium. So some states don't use WIDA, the vast majority do, and our state endorses the ELD, English Language Development Standards, that WIDA set forth. So some of you are very familiar with WIDA. It's a framework that I hope all educators are aware of. So again, some of our core content teachers can provide differentiated kinds of support for language and literacy development for multilingual learners. And many of you in the audience already know that, that we use the WIDA Access 2.0 as a test to determine English language proficiency levels each year. So just wanted to provide that background. We're one of 40 states that uses this framework. Okay, so I want to get a little bit into the what. And here's my colleague, Kim Cook, in kindergarten classroom doing a big book reading. And so what are we talking about with really effective and research-based literacy and research practices for multilingual learners? Here you see on the screen, this is a graphic that I've gently borrowed from my colleague and mentor, Kathy Escamilla, who came to North Carolina about a year ago. And if you see in the QR code, it'll lead you to a part of her talk. It's on a page, and she's the second one down in North Carolina State University's Linguistic Diversity Speaker Series. So I invite you to listen to Dr. Escamilla, and there's a lot of good things to say. But what I really love about this graphic is that she lays out for us and shows how we've really narrowed into some of the discrete language skills and decoding skills that we know are part of the foundational skills that all kids need to know in order to read. And so we agree very much on that foundational skills are foundational and they're important and they're part of an overall literacy program. But notice over time that we've narrowed in from language to literacy reading, and we're very narrowly focused right now on some of phonics and decoding. But I use this as a way to show that we also have other things with multilingual learners that we need to pay equal attention to, right? And some of those things include, as Dr. Fierro pointed out, oral language development. Oral language development is so important to introduce literacy and reading when kids are learning to decode. It makes sense when they decode and they learn to decode and create words, understand words related to concepts that they already know. So a student might know gato, what that means, G-A-T-O, gato, but then when we introduce cat, C-A-T, to a student that doesn't speak English, that doesn't really have any meaning behind it, right? So we want to make sure that as we're introducing foundational skills in reading, we're also building all of those other parts of literacy that we know multilingual learners really do need to know. And that's a slightly different process than monolingual students. So I want to just say here that there is a science of reading, but I would like to say there's probably more something like sciences of reading. And the reason I say that is because the literature based on reading development was largely conducted and has been largely conducted with monolingual learners, monolingual speakers of English in the United States, but monolingual students. And as Dr. Fierro has pointed out, and I love this graphic of the superhighway, like the superhighway, and our multilingual learners have like multiple lanes, right? They also utilize different parts of the brain in slightly different ways. But that superhighway is really important to keep in mind, that there's a bigger piece that's happening as they're adjudicating and they're making language decisions all the time. So one way to think about this is, and I'm quoting this from a paper that I found very interesting, is that multilingual learners process all of the languages all of the time. If you think about how tiring that is, right? So if you have a student that maybe comes from an indigenous speaker of a language from Central America, has done early literacy development in Spanish in a country in Central America, and comes to the United States, that student is bringing with them a big linguistic repertoire, that there are lots of things that they know already, lots of things that they know that we will never know in their experiences and their lived experiences, but they're processing all of those languages all the time. So the multilingual brain is figuring out at any given moment how to do that really quickly, how to decide which language do I need for which purpose with which speaker, and we call that process adjudication. As our multilinguals adjudicate language, they have to sort of kind of suppress part of one and think about another. And so they're making language decisions, then that sparks a lot of brain functioning happening at the same time. Let me just point out that that's one of the reasons why we know bilingual education programs work so well, and we see strong literacy outcomes for kids in those programs that are learning to read and write in more than one language, because we are enhancing all of that language processing at high levels of literacy, right? So we're using that very important skill. Okay, so just to move on, so we know that oral English proficiency is really essential for reading comprehension. So it's part of our work is to teach foundational skills and decoding, and we firmly agree this is really important work, and we know all kids need to know how to do that. We also want to make sure that they understand, as we know, what they're reading. And so building oral English proficiency and oral language is essential, and Dr. Fierro kindly and nicely pointed that out. We know our multilingual learners have a lot of cultural linguistic background knowledge that they bring with us. those are resources also that they bring to our learning environment, and we want to affirm their identities in learning spaces. And I loved, again, that Dr. Fierro talked about the learning environment and how important it is to make that stress-free and to affirm students in who they are. Keep in mind, some of our multilingual learners can already read and write in a language. They already know those really foundational skills. They can associate sounds with symbols already. And so our work at that point with educators is really to show differences across language. I have to tell I don't think I have time, a really brief story here. I was working in a literacy program a few years ago with some students, and I brought in some bilingual books, which I love to do because it's interesting to see how multilinguals approach a bilingual book, right? So this is not unusual. So children open the book, and one side of the book is in English and one side of the book is Spanish. And the child looks over at the left side of the book and starts looking in English and, you know, kind of going down the book, and then looks over to the right side of the book and starts looking in Spanish. And you know what they do? De repente, they're like, all of a sudden, maestra, look, in English, it takes 4 words to say the same thing. It takes 6 words to say in Spanish. And they immediately start counting and looking at the relationship between 2 languages. That's the magic sauce. That's the magic sauce for multilingual learners, that they are able to think across languages, and they're doing automatically this kind of contrastive linguistics. It's a fancy way of saying comparing, right? They're using part of the brain. And so this is so important that we understand that our multilingual learners are doing this all of the time with all of their languages. So they know, some of them know concepts of print already, and those are things we don't have to reteach. Okay, so finally, another little few pieces about evidence-based reading, and I'll give you some maybe takeaways here. Reading is one component of overall strong literacy programs. We want to include oracy, reading, and writing in that. Writing is a skill that takes a long time to develop. We know it often lags behind some of the reading skills. And so really clear attention and focus to some of those skills. Support in writing will help reading, right? And will help comprehension in reading. So really important, let's build an overall good, strong literacy program that builds foundational skills and taps into the linguistic resources that these kids have already in school. I can tell you some more stories about how smart they are, our multilingual geniuses. And then finally, bilingual instruction for multilingual learners shows higher incomes than English-only models. And we have 40 years of good research on this. I'm just pointing it out. Our state has the 5th largest number of dual language programs. I'm really proud of that fact. And we're going to continue. We're going to continue to really build those linguistic resources and smart multilingual learners across languages. Okay. Real briefly here, I was thinking about this when I was thinking about the sciences of reading. And so there are areas that multilingual learners and monolingual learners share. So in the middle of this Venn diagram, you can see some of those areas of overlap. And I don't mean to exclude some really good research that also exists in the middle of in these spaces. There's a lot of good research on reading, and more is coming. But some of those things we know, foundational reading skills, both sets of kids need to have. Oral language being mapped onto written language, we know that's important. Both language development and reading skills. For those of you familiar with Scarborough's rope, we know that language development and reading skills, both we need that. Motivation and engagement. We want kids to love to read and to learn. And then finally, both groups of students benefit from overall literacy programs. Of course, good programs, oracy, reading, and writing. Now, just to kind of go forward, our monolingual students, though, look, they've got a language that they're being taught through a language they already know. They have support for that in school, on TV, on the playground. And so they bring that with them, and they've got all of that support around them all the time. They can connect English oracy to the sounds and symbols we're introducing early on because they know the language. They have background knowledge that's very much in the everyday environment for the most part, right? They have that knowledge. There's not background that we usually need to pre-teach when we're introducing literacy to monolingual kids. And then finally, their home language and culture exists in the world around them every day. Multilingual learners, though, is a little bit different. This is why I say there might be some sciences of reading here. One thing is that reading instruction is not likely to be provided in a language that they use at home. Probably not the case. So that's something immediately think about, right? We've got some building to do. They have a distinct oral language, a first language on which to connect print. So language development is a crucial part of this, not right? Really got to build language to be able to build the reading component onto it. They have diverse background knowledges and different concepts for things. So that's fascinating. And they can do this transfer thing I mentioned a little earlier about contrastive linguistics, and some of the concepts of print really transfer quite well. And they have a larger holistic multilingual repertoire. So this is a bigger, that superhighway, I think, kind of that Dr. Fierro is alluding to in there. Their linguistic repertoire is quite impressive, you know, for kids. Like I said, there are geniuses. So what do we do with all of this information? What do we have for some takeaways, and how do we work with this? Couple key things to leave you with. First of all, is that foundational reading skills really should be explicitly taught, and we want all kids to be able to read at high levels. We want them to decode and understand high levels of physics when they get to that class. For all of the skills that they've learned along the way, I'd love them to be able to do it in more than one language. And some of our kids in bilingual programs can do that. But we want them to have foundational reading skills. So some direct instruction is very helpful in this area. And some of those skills could transfer if students have literacy skills in their first language already. And remember that multilinguals are using multiple languages all of the time, and they're adjudicating. So just keep that in mind as you're building into explicitly teaching those reading skills. The more you can tap into what they already know, the better. Takeaway 2. So reading development for multilinguals is influenced by the way 2 or more languages can intersect. Remember, some of our kids speak 3, no 4. So we just sort of assume maybe they have another language, but I wouldn't assume anything. I would check, right? It's important to know what they already know to build strong reading development onto that and map that onto their identities and their linguistic repertoire. There's a benefit when we can provide instruction that illuminates multilingual, metalinguistic awareness. That is how languages work, meta meaning above and linguistic meaning language. When they think above the language and they think about how the language works, they're able to better manipulate the differences across languages. And it's a really good skill for our multilingual learners, for us as educators to build into. They have a larger linguistic repertoire, I said, and different cultural linguistic backgrounds. So that's your takeaway number 2. Takeaway number 3, all teachers are teachers of language. So if you're a science teacher, you just became a language teacher who teaches through the medium of science. And that's one way to think about all of our jobs as educators, is that all of our content areas, core content, is dense. The language can be dense as kids get deeper into the curriculum. So sometimes simple words are really not so simple. For instance, take the word table, right? We think all of our kids are multilingual learners by first grade. They probably got the word table. But think about the word table in your English language arts class, and kids open a book and they have a table of contents. Now, what does that mean? And then think about a 9th grader that's taking chemistry, and they enter the class and they see a periodic table of elements. So table has different meanings depending on the genre, depending on what it's being used for. So I would encourage all educators to think about making language explicit and the language of the content area very explicit, and not to make too many assumptions about our multilingual learners. They know a lot. It's just that we might not know all that they know, right? And so core content teachers have specialized language, and we can build language awareness across the curriculum, and that would be really nice work. And the last one here is that multilingualism is a resource. We see cognitive benefits, social benefits, academic benefits, economic benefits at the individual level, at the community level, at the societal level. And we have a wonderful Secretary of Education, Dr. Cardona, who has released his multilingualism as a superpoder. And we're excited because we know all of the benefits of multilinguals. We don't want to take that superpower away. We want to build into it. So again, I'd advocate where possible. And if you need more info, happy to share bilingual education dual language programs, the way we support literacy in multiple languages. And remember, accents, to me, accents are like, I recognize someone's got a superpoder. So I don't know, it doesn't bother me if someone says help or help. To me, they told me what they needed to say, but I hear superpowers when I hear accents. And so I'll just leave you with this funny picture that I found. What if soy milk is just regular milk introducing itself in Spanish? That's kind of funny. So So just a little thought, and if you have questions or I can be helpful, please feel free to reach out at NC State. We have a master's and certificate program in multilingual ed, and we've incorporated a Carolina Association for Bilingual Education last year. So happy to have you join that too. Thanks so much.
Dr. Coady, thank you so very much. It's wonderful to have a state view to know how many of these children we're serving and need to serve. And then those of you from outside of North Carolina, I'm sure you're thinking about what does that look like in my state. And both Dr. Fierro and Dr. Coady have given us some ways to think about this. We have a few giveaways, and I want to introduce Kelly Heiner. She was the start of this, the conception of tonight. She came to the Reading League North Carolina in our very young days and offered to help. And she has a couple things from 95% group to give away.
Yes, thank you. I am so honored to join you all this evening. And as you embark on and move forward with all the amazing knowledge that Dr. Fierro and Dr. Coady have shared with us this evening, we want to make sure to provide you with a resource that will help provide you with instructional considerations built in, specifically designed for your English language learners and your multilingual learners. So we are going to give away 3 Soundwell starter packs to 3 lucky colleagues joining us this evening. And because we value professional learning and growing your practice as an educator, we're also going to ensure that you get to attend a complimentary Soundwell training as well. So without further ado, Laura, can you go ahead and select our 3 lucky winners?
Yes, the first one is Keegan Manchester. And Kelly's going to drop her email in the chat for you, Keegan, so y'all can be in touch and you can tell her where to send your Start Soundwell starter kit. The second winner. Here?
Oh, good.
Yes.
You are here, Keegan. Perfect.
The next winner is Christine Perry.
Christine, are you with us? Christine Perry.
I hope so. She was earlier. Uh-oh. Christine, if
going once.
Yes, I don't see Christine
going
in the
twice.
Zoom. So let me do it again. Another spin.
Fingers crossed.
Amanda Berry.
Amanda, are you with us? Yay,
She
good,
is.
Amanda.
And
all right, and our 3rd lucky winner.
Let's see. Oh, I know this one. Kristen Stinson.
Kristen, are you with us still?
I think she is.
Oh,
and I
good.
know. Yeah.
Wonderful, Kristen, Amanda, and Keegan. We are so excited for you all. I put my email in the chat. Please send me an email with the best shipping address so that I can make sure to get these materials to you. And then we'll also connect on your preferred professional learning date as well.
And the Reading League North Carolina has something to give away. I'm going to drop something in the chat. If you are looking for more opportunities in North Carolina to learn about this topic, there is a day of dyslexia that Dr. Elsa Cardenas-Hagen she's coming to Durham to present. And from the Reading League, let's see, you can't see it when I've got this crazy background, but she wrote a book called Literacy Foundations for English Learners that came from the Reading League shop. And we are going to mail it to somebody. Let's see who it is. Get back to my wheel. Here we go. Tori Mazur. You still here, Tori? And forgive me, I'm monolingual if I said someone's name wrong. Yes, Tori, wonderful. So my email is, if y'all can you put my Reading League email in the chat for Tori, and I'll get it to you, Tori.
Thank you, Laura. Any last words from our presenters before we close?
First of all, Dr. Coady, I thought it was going to be an impossible situation. We did it
Yeah, we did.
in under an hour.
Y'all are amazing. You hit us with so much fantastic information. This is certainly a wonderful presentation for us to go back and look at again and think through what are our additional takeaways with such a content-heavy time. So thank you both so much.
Thanks for having me and happy to do it again. I hope to see you all soon.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so
Thank you to
much.
all.
All right. Well, if you're still here, we do have some upcoming events from our organization. We invite you to check out our website at nc.thereadingleague.org, and you can do the /upcoming events. Here's what's happening in February. I will be at Key Learning Center's Best Practices Symposium, so I will probably be in this t-shirt, so come find me and check out our table. We are hosting a member exclusive event with Dr. Maria Murray and Carrie Curto. They are sharing about some of the resources from our national organization. So it's we encourage you to join our organization if you are not already a member. We also have Reading League board members who will be in person at the Hill Center for the annual Day of Dyslexia with IDA North Carolina. And some of us will be virtual as well. And then we also have our next 7 Mighty Moves book study coming up on Move 4. It's going to be a good one. So we invite you to check out any of those events. We will make sure to share any links in addition to having them on our website as well. And as always, we are doing our best to share on our social media and get on our channels. So help us increase our followers, like and subscribe, y'all. We are about to drop things in our YouTube. We are making moves. We are so glad that you are here, which is why you should become a member if you are not already. And we just thank you so much for being a part of this movement. It means the world to us that we have been able to bring the Reading League to North Carolina so that we can begin bringing learning like we experienced this evening. Thanks everybody for being here, especially to our speakers and our co-sponsor 95% group. Thanks y'all.
Thank you all.